And I was here last year. I did the Taptic Tour with my son. My son started got into cycling and got me riding again. And to be honest, I think with all the things that happened the last 3 or 4 years, for me, I was actually excited that as bad as it got, it needed to get that bad for cycling to change. And when everything kind of exploded, I came to see ASO and just wanted to talk to him about solutions. Because, for me, it's not about people who are bad or good. It's about trying to allow riders that don't want to do drugs be able to compete in the Tour de France. And most of the riders they just want a level playing field. And there's a lot of tragedies in cycling too. You got Marco Pantani. Yes, he died because of cocaine, but why was he doing cocaine? He was treated like a criminal. Well, without a positive, he had a hematocrit over 50%. But meanwhile, everybody else is getting away with it. And I met him. He's a nice kid. He's a kid, and there's those stories that I see and other stories that I know about that are from a human side are tragic, and that it shouldn't be that way in cycling. There should be every kid should have a chance to come to Europe like I did and not be forced to get on a team. It's part of a forced program. That's the way cycling's been, for quite a few years. We got a rider right now, Davis Finney's son, Taylor Finney. Now that's a real talent. The guy started cycling. He wins the world championships after 2 years of riding, and he's as good as professionals in the pursuit. It's the way I was when I was 18. And I think it was New York Times I read his interview, but he said, I think he'll be a good one-day racer. And I'm like, God, that guy's got a motor. You can't do that without a high VO2 max. You can't do it without the capacity of a Tour de France winner. There's no reason he can't be the next Tour de France winner. But I'd like to make sure that he gets to come over here and doesn't have to face what other riders had to face in the 90s. And riders had to face incredible pressure. I mean, I would like to believe I wouldn't have ever done anything, but I couldn't guarantee that because I had such a passion at 18, but I was winning at 18 against professionals. I was competitive against Hinault at 19, so I didn't have to make that choice, and I'm glad I didn't have to make that choice. But I think there's a lot of riders who don't want to make that choice, and what they want is a level playing field, and that they have all the assurance in the world that everybody's doing the maximum. And I believe there are ways you can eliminate 98% of the advantages of drugs, and I think the Tour de France realizes it. I've spent days talking to him, and I'm really optimistic about the future of cycling and the Tour de France.
So
very optimistic.
You've seen things here that make you think that things have changed, that are different?
Things are. It's a process, but it's facing the problem. It's like an addict who has a problem. He was an addict, but it takes work, and you might have some setbacks, but the principal thing is that the addict or whoever it is, they're working on improving themselves to make it better, and that's what's happening with the Tour de France. You can't control every rider. You're always going to maybe have the chance that somebody's positive, but what's changed in the last, when I was racing, if there was doping, there were guys, it was an individual thing, and it was that individual. When you read about the organization of a team putting that pressure, a rider doesn't have a choice. Either you quit the sport or you give in. And that's just it's criminal to me. It shouldn't be that way.
Do you think the internal testing that some of the teams are doing now, the slipstream and high road, is part of the solution? Or do you think
I think it's one of the solutions, but it's got to be part of a bigger independent anti-doping group like WADA, where there's no ties to the sport. There cannot be a tie to a sport who does the doping, because in America there are rumors that I've heard about Wade Exum and even our own athletes. I mean, this is just rumors. I'm not saying I have any evidence except there was a lawsuit with Wade Exum. But when you have when you have a sport that has only an interest of keeping its image, controlling the doping, there's always a chance that somebody's going to protect somebody. And I'm not saying it's. I'm just saying this is. It only makes sense that there's a neutral, transparent doping agency, and the UCI could stay in the sport, but they should just give licenses. They should promote the benefits of cycling. They should create events that get young riders into racing. The Tour de France should put on the very best race they can, but there should be an independent group that has the police involved, the anti-doping, and that it is transparent and they're thinking leading edge, out of the box thinking for testing, because cycling is an aerobic sport, and the way you get more power is by oxygen, and it's with a watt machine and a VO2 max machine. You could start profiling riders from the day they get their license, and if they're, I'm telling you, I did a VO2 max 2 months ago on one of the best, most accurate machines in the world that I used since '89. My liters of oxygen has not changed. In fact, I mean, it's the same. I did 6.1 liters of oxygen, where I used when I was racing 6.3, 6.4 liters. I didn't change at 18. I didn't change at 25. I changed at the end of my career because of health problems, and who knows if the peloton was going faster. But my basic genetic capabilities never changed.
So the years that you haven't been back to the tour, is it because of the doping problems? Or you
I had my own health problems. I had 3 operations. I had some personal problems that I had to deal with, but it was part of it. I had a painful finish in my career. Just I tried everything I could to race better, but I couldn't keep up. I mean, you couldn't keep up. We were doing 45 kilometers an hour up some climbs, 40 k's an hour climbs, which I never saw in my life. I mean, you race for 10 years pro, and in '91 we had to do a stage at 50 kilometers an hour with 3 stops with the train. I'd never seen anything like that. And things don't change in 1 year. It doesn't happen. There are no miracles in cycling, in sports. You're good at 15, 16, 17, 20, 25. I mean, it's the way it is. It's. I don't care who you talk to. There's a learning curve, but I said I came here at 18. Probably my first real stage race. It was open with the 3rd place Tour de France winner, East Germans, the Polish teams, and at 18 I won the race, 5 days. As 19, I was 3rd behind Hinault in the Dauphiné Libéré. I mean, I didn't change. I mean, with 4 or 5 years of experience in racing, what you're learning to do is try to how do you get more specific, and how do you peak and fine-tune your season. That's what really happens. But I'm certain if I had a watt measuring device at 18, I would have produced the same as I did at 25. So,
what's going on with your bike company these days?
I'm in a lawsuit with Trek.
Yeah. And but are you looking to sponsor another team or keep the company going?
Well, I'm looking to taking Trek on in a nice litigation. That's about all I can say, but it's not going to be a pretty one. For an American, I don't believe the French have any anti-Americanism in the sport. When you see the people in the country, you could have some guy in New York, Paris. It's like some guy in New York saying, he could be a jerk. But I spent 12 years on a French team, and this whole anti-Americanism is a cooked-up fabrication of imagination from certain people. I've only experienced people who love the sport, and I've never had. I raced against Hinault, who was like Muhammad Ali in France, and he was going for a 6. And if I was racing in probably, I don't know, Italy, Spain, I don't know. I'm just saying that I could have been taken down, but I never had ever a bad interaction with any spectator in France. So, the average French person you meet them, they're incredibly nice, and that's how I know the French. I know the riders, from 12 years of racing. So there was something L'Equipe I was not happy with about Valverde, because it was totally totally taken out of context that he shouldn't be here. A journalist said, well, Valverde was involved in Operation Puerto, and I said, well, I heard he was, yeah, but I don't know the real details of Valverde. I said, if it's the same evidence that is on Tyler Hamilton or Ulrich, well, maybe he shouldn't be here, but I don't know. But it wasn't that way. It was like he shouldn't be here.
So they just kept that bit of the quote.
What's that?
They just kept that bit.
Yeah, they edited their part out, and then that happens every time, and it's just like it's just, sometimes I wish I never just opened my mouth. But it was just a fact that you look at the evidence on Ulrich and all that. I mean, their careers are over, but there's riders who had 10 times the evidence, and they race throughout their career. And I like to see these things treated equally. Make sure that everybody's playing by the same rules. Everybody has the same chance.
It's not consistent.
It's not consistent. It hasn't been consistent. And, it's changed. I mean, I think the UCI has really put out a big effort, but it's not good enough because you can't assure that it's always going to be this way. There could be somebody new, and there could be somebody else in power that isn't correct. So you have to have any good government, any good governance has to have accountability and transparency. Our government doesn't right now. It's not, to me, I'm not happy with our government. So
why do you think it wasn't a level playing field for so long, Rick? What's the main reason behind it?
Well, they didn't have a test, and I don't think they thought a lot about it. But there was negligence to me when you had multiple riders dying. Although it was a confusing period, so it took some hard evidence. But although when you're by '93, everybody knew what was going on, and I know that if we knew, then people governing this sport had to know. I mean, if you didn't, you're negligent because you had riders at 25 to 30 years old dying, and that's not right. So, and I got a letter yesterday from the UCI. They're trying to sue me for saying that I believe they're corrupt. Although my attorney wrote back 2 years ago when I got 2 letters from the UCI threatening to sue me because I said something slanderous about the UCI, calling them corrupt. But the Webster's Dictionary of corruption is that when there's a governing body who doesn't do their best to live up to the ethics and morals to protect the people they're governing, they're corrupt. And that's what I was talking about. I wasn't pinpointing any person. It was, the fact is, there's been enough evidence, there's been enough stuff that the maximum hasn't been done. And I think there's a lot of improvement. And, I've talked to Michael Ashton, leading doping experts. I mean, with his ideas, I think you can eliminate 98% of the advantage of doping, and that's what needs to happen.
One of the smallest American rider contingents here in several years. Does that say anything to you about the state of American cycling?
No, the state of American cycling. More people riding bikes right now than the state of racing. It's a generation right now. You had Tyler Hamilton's out, Floyd Landis is out, Armstrong stopped. I mean, you have these riders who are out of the sport. Now you got Taylor Phinney that's coming up. You have other riders that are out there that are coming up. I mean, it was when I retired, everybody's like, oh, the sport's dead, but there's a whole other generation. There's going to be another generation. Although, I mean, I've made a suggestion to the Cycling Federation that they should stop focusing on the elite program, the Olympics, World Championships, and I suggested a high school racing program, time trials, team time trials. There's 4,000 kids in Minneapolis or Minnesota that in the winter they compete. They train together. They compete in cross-country skiing, and why can't we do that in cycling? Imagine drawing 200,000 high school kids into cycling. Because I believe that for the diabetes, for the problem of obesity, diabetes. Great book out there called Spark, written by Dr. John Ratty, that I've had multiple discussions with. It shows the benefits of high-intense aerobic exercise, preschool, Naperville, Illinois, school district, 19,000 kids, students. Their obesity rate's 3% versus the national average of 30%, and their SAT and GPA scores are up 20 to 25% with only because of exercise. I mean, kids today have gone from, our kids go from dark indoors to dark indoors at home, dark indoors, no sunlight, back home to computers and TV, and there's no. It's amazing. There's not more. That is part of depression. Sun helps produce serotonin, and you got these kids that have no physical activity, no sunlight. I mean, there's such a huge place for improvement with the health of our kids. I'm actually participating in our. I have a group, two businessmen that we're working on a pilot program on my son's high school with hopefully 2 major companies that are going to participate. The academics are going to change, but the biggest part is going to be that there's going to be a forced or a mandatory fitness hour before school, but the chemicals that happen with exercise, it charges the brain to be able to retain memory and I was a kid that had ADD, and I know that had I been exercising just before school, I probably would have gotten a lot better grades. So.